And more news coming in. Russians are attacking Kharkiv, Zephrazinia, the Sumi region and Odessa, destroying residential buildings and civilian infrastructure. I'm reading out from a statement that has been issued by Zelenskyy at this point in time. In Zephrazinia, missile strikes injuring 20 people and killing 3. This was a demonstrative and cynical Russian strike, is what Zelenskyy has said. Well, they are aware that a meeting is taking place today in Washington that will address the end of war. We will have a discussion with President Trump about key issues, along with Ukraine. The leaders of the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Italy, Finland, European Union, NATO will participate in this discussion. This is a post of Ukrainian President Zelenskyy at this point in time. I'm going straight across to Sasha from Kiev in Ukraine at this point in time. Sasha is a journalist. Thank you so much for your time. Just to give us an idea about this pattern, and we've seen this in the past as well. Each time there is an attempt to talk peace, we've seen these strikes. Zelenskyy says these are cynical and these will be brought up.
Good day or good evening, good people in India. So we can say that every time that the peaceful negotiation is taking place whenever in the world, so there is no hope among Ukrainian society that anything will happen after that. So now we can say that it is happening once again, that the cruelty that stands for the Russian stands about peaceful negotiation, that civilian cities are hit after, so the only evidence of their intentions around Ukraine.
Talk to us a little about whether there is any level of optimism at all, given that there are strikes that have now been seen and perhaps an expectation that things like that would happen. What are the Ukrainians looking at?
Ukrainian looking at European Union for now, in hope that they will support Ukraine on the level that USA supported them before, and we will have they will have more power to be able to fight back for Ukrainians, because for now, the level and the increasing of the attacks on the civilian cities are, I would say, the most horrifical during all the 4 years of the full-scale invasion of Russia. So the escalation is and devastation is the worst.
I'm also wanting to ask you about this, what are the chances and how are Ukrainians looking at this, and how they look at these talks, in the sense that are they really expecting this to bring peace? And at the end of the day, there is support that is coming from Ukraine, from the European Union, from European countries as well, isn't it? And it's a meeting that is taking place in the presence of the leadership in the UK as well. The Prime Minister would be there.
Unfortunately, the fatigue that Ukrainian society has for now are allowing me to say that among Ukrainian society, it is less and less hope for peaceful negotiation. So it's or we can win on the battlefield somehow, or Russia economy will collapse and raise the people to do something about what is going on. Because for now, every time that peaceful negotiation is taking place, whenever in the world, so the increasing of the attacks on the Ukrainian civilian cities tells us that there is no hope for that, and there is no power for and no trust, unfortunately, for international organizations that should stand for this, for rights of civilian people as well. We are not talking about frontline at all.
Right. I'm going to leave it at that for the moment. I'm going to thank you for joining in with your views and with your perspective on the expectation of Ukrainians from these talks that are taking place in Washington, D.C. tonight. And staying with this, after a 10-on-10 meeting with Russian President Putin, Donald Trump is all set to meet Ukrainian President Zelenskyy at the Oval Office today at 10 this evening. Ukrainian President Zelenskyy has arrived in Washington, D.C. He said he's excited to meet Trump, is hoping to strike a real peace deal. He added that he wants to end the war fairly and swiftly. Zelenskyy, though, is not coming alone. Joined by European leaders in Washington, Trump has a different motive, though. He wants Zelenskyy to strike a peace agreement. Trump has made it clear that Ukraine cannot join NATO until the war ends. Also, ahead of the big meeting in Washington, the U.S. Secretary of State has said both Ukraine and Russia will have to make concessions to reach a peace deal to end the war. Marco Rubio has asserted that when it comes to territories and territorial claims, the final decision should rest with Ukraine.
Since the territorial issue is so important, it should be discussed only by the leaders of Ukraine and Russia at the trilateral Ukraine, United States, Russia. So far, Russia gives no sign that trilateral will happen, and if Russia refuses, then new sanctions must follow.
Thank you.
Ukraine must be able to uphold its sovereignty and its territorial integrity. There can be no limitations on Ukrainian armed forces, be it cooperation with or other third countries or assistance from other third countries, no limitations for the Ukrainian armed forces. As I've often said, Ukraine must become a steel porcupine, undigestible for potential invaders.
You can't have a peace agreement unless both sides give and get. You can't have a peace agreement unless both sides make concessions. That's a fact. That's true in virtually any negotiation. If not, it's just called surrender. And neither side is going to surrender. So both sides are going to have to make concessions. So of course concessions were asked. But what utility would there be of me going on a program and tell you we wagged our finger at Putin and told him you must do this and you must do that? It's only going to make it harder and less likely that they're going to agree to these things. So these negotiations, as much as everyone would love it to be a live pay-per-view event, these discussions only work best when they are conducted privately in serious negotiations in which people who have to go back and respond to constituencies. The president has said repeatedly, when it comes to territories and territorial claims, that's ultimately something Ukraine will have to decide. It's their territory, it's their country. Ultimately, what they're willing to live with is what they'll have to decide on. Maybe the answer is they're not willing to live with any of this. We don't know, but that's what we need to explore. In the meantime, the one thing we do know that Ukraine has said repeatedly and publicly talked about is security guarantees. They need to be able to enter into security guarantees that ensure that this is never going to happen again, that they're not going to get reinvaded in 2.5 or 3 years or 4 years or whenever it may be. They don't want to be back here again. They want to be able to go on to rebuild their country and live their lives. That's a very reasonable request. That's something we're working on, and that's something the Russian side has to understand, obviously, is that as a sovereign country, Ukraine has a right, like every sovereign country, to enter into security alliances and agreements with other countries.
Well, if it is a turning point, I think it will only be the latest of what has been a pretty intense back and forth ever since Trump has come into office. For his first several months in office, he positioned himself quite closely to Putin, even as Putin continuously reneged on his word. But then shortly going into kind of in the weeks leading up to the Alaska summit, he started to align himself more with Europe to pursue a policy more in line with his predecessor, Joe Biden's. And then over the course of the meeting in Alaska, that was all upended. So could this upend everything again? Could he go back to where he was before the Alaska summit and side more with Europe and Ukraine? Quite possibly, but it's been a lot of whiplash here in the United States. And I think what's particularly notable is that Putin is not only demanding that the world recognize the territory that Russia has already conquered and is currently occupying, but that Ukraine cede territory that it still controls to Russia. And I think what that really shows, and what Ukraine is well aware of and what the Europeans are well aware of, is that Putin is not really willing to negotiate a good faith end to this war. He hasn't backed off his maximalist war aims, but he seems to be very successful at sweet-talking Donald Trump into thinking that he is some kind of great compromiser and is willing to settle.